If you want to be successful in capital raising and building your company, you have to really be a big problem solver.
Right, in the design of a solution to solve your own problem. I think that's a very important element of founders.
When it comes to the innovations around capital raising and retail investors and Reg A, you need a platform like a Shopify for capital raising.
Because from a design perspective, you know the customer. You are the customer.
Exactly.
Hello, everybody. Delighted to welcome all to another edition of Behind the Scenes, podcast on extraordinary founders and some of the context behind the decisions they've made along the way, the inflection points, the wins and losses, hopefully to give everybody a bit of a window into what it's like to start and grow an exciting technology company. My name's Matt Goldstien. I'm one of the co-founders of DealMaker, the online platform for raising capital. Delighted to have Trung Pham, founder of RYSE. I'll give a bit of explanation about DealMaker and what it is we do and why we get out of bed in the morning. But first, Trung, why don't you introduce yourself and tell everybody about the story behind RYSE?
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. So RYSE was born back in 2015, actually. And I've said this story many times, but it's a very simple problem that I faced that I was looking for a solution for. And moved into a condo downtown Toronto. I'm one of those, gadget freaks, tech freaks type of guys that like to have gadgets in the house and the latest technologies. So I was looking for motorized shades. And what ended up happening was I went to a few retailers and dealers and designers and I got quoted for regular shades and the upgrade to get the motorized. And every single retailer and dealer was giving me a different quote. Some of them was another $500 on top. Some of them was another $1,000 on top. It's just way too expensive. So I opted in for the regular roller shades. I didn't have the budget at that time. So bought 4 large floor-to-ceiling windows for my condo. Then a couple months later, when it got really hot and sunny during the summer seasons, went back to the same designer I bought the regular shades from, and I asked him to get my shades upgraded to be motorized. And what they told me was actually pretty shocking. They said I couldn't motorize my shades. I had to replace them with brand new motorized shades. Didn't make sense to me. And I plainly asked them, can't you guys just give me a motor that I could put on the window frame and control the chains or cords like a motorized pulley? I said it just like that. And they said, no, that product doesn't exist. I didn't believe them at first, went home, Googled it, and sure enough, didn't exist. And that was kind of the eureka moment. So, fast forward to today, it's a very common idea that you could motorize your existing window shades with beaded chain with our technology. But back then, I thought it existed, didn't exist, and that was kind of the opportunity I saw. That was really when the idea for RYSE was born, and it led me down to a slippery slope to where we are today, a very, very journey of a roller coaster, if you will. And ever since we came up with the idea we've launched multiple versions of the product. We're launching multiple products in the smart window blinds and shades space in the category of smart window coverings. And, I'm excited to share my journey with you today.
I'm delighted. So we'll talk a little bit more about that journey, but what I want to highlight from the initial origin story from when you founded the company was that identification of a problem that you yourself were experiencing, right? And the design of a solution to solve your own problem. I think that's a very important element of a founder's story because from a design perspective, you know the customer. You are the customer.
Exactly.
So you solve your own problem, and if you can figure out a way to solve that problem, and the economics work, and it's scalable, and you can go to market in a way where you can acquire customers cheaper than the cost of delivering the product, then you can build an entire company around solving a problem that you yourself experienced. So for those who don't know, DealMaker, which is the company that I co-founded with alongside Rebecca Casaba, had a similar origin story. Both Rebecca and I were, deep subject matter experts in capital markets. We were both partners at an international law firm, and we dealt with capital raising every day. And we knew that raising capital is very hard. There's a lot of friction when you're going out to raise capital, and really what you're doing is sales. You're selling a security, and the technology does exist to make sales easier, and the advances in technology should be made available to every founder who wants to go out and raise capital. Raising capital is such an important part of a founder's journey. And so we built DealMaker, which was at the time one of the first online platforms for raising capital. So our customers were opening what was essentially an online store and creating campaigns in order to sell shares online. And as we grew in scale and ambition. We did in 2021 the Green Bay Packers common stock offering, and that was a moment where we could say to the world, if you have a brand and you have followers, in their case it was fans, right, and you've won trust and you have people excited about what you're doing, you can turn that into a source of capital. And for us at DealMaker, that was one of the moments where we realized we've developed something that the world really needs, because every founder, in order to sell a product, has to do the very basics that they'll have to do to raise capital. You have to find the person who needs what you're offering.
Yeah.
You have to have a value prop. You have to earn trust. You have to maintain that trust. You'll be compared against alternatives in the market. And so, when we built DealMaker, we built a suite of, it's a mix of technology, data, and analytics, but it's really a toolkit for founders to run online campaigns to raise capital the way they run online campaigns to sell their product. And for those who don't know, we've been delighted to have RYSE as a customer for a
couple of years,
2 years now, coming up on 2 years.
It's our third campaign, I believe, that we're extending.
And one thing that I've always noticed about you, Trung, as a founder is you're the type of user of DealMaker, and one thing my partner likes to say is the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. The way in which I've seen you use DealMaker, you'll click every button, you'll try every avenue, you'll go down every pathway, you'll talk to every founder. You're really on the cutting edge of developing new ideas in how you raise capital. And I've been delighted to watch you succeed at that on our platform. It strikes me that that's probably how you do everything.
Yes. I'd like to add, I always thought of DealMaker as the Shopify of capital raising. So that's kind of the idea. And for those that understand e-commerce, everyone loves Shopify, especially for your online store. I think the majority of e-commerce companies and direct-to-consumer companies use Shopify as the main platform. So if you look at DealMaker and capital raising in today's day and age, just like Shopify and e-commerce, the concept of acquiring a customer is very similar to acquiring an investor.
Agreed.
So that's how you have to think about it. That's how we think about it. And if you build an e-commerce team, a growth team internally at your company, you should be doing the same thing with an investment team, an investor relations team. So we obviously have a strong team of investor relations associate and our head of finance that leads that activity. And just like you said at the very beginning, capital raising is at the very beginning for a CEO, their main job. It's a full-time job. And I can't tell you how many days and nights I've had just focusing on capital raising the first 3 or 4 years of the company. And it's a struggle because it's a distraction from running your company. You want to grow the company. I think ever since discovering the idea of a community around and raising online, just like we sell products through our e-commerce store, everything has been a lot more efficient. I've been able to spend more time on growth, on B2B partnerships, on expansion, than I do have to spend time on capital raising. So I think that's one of the biggest struggles with early stage startups, where they just have to spend a ton of time just meeting VCs after VCs, investors after investors, and getting the door slammed on them. This process, being the Shopify of capital raising online, makes everything a lot more efficient, a lot more smooth, and you control your destiny at the end of the day. So that's what I really like about this whole idea of capital raising in today's day and age.
No, I appreciate that, and I encourage you to tell your friends, as you know. But one thing you said that really resonates with me is when you distinguish between the time you spend building your brand and on your growth versus the time you spend raising capital. My hope is that one day these two things are the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. It's putting yourself out there into the market to say to the world, I have something that you need. And if you want to buy this product, you could be an owner too, right?
Exactly.
So it's always struck me as inefficient that companies have their brand building strategy, their growth strategy, the people they hire, the budget, the efforts they take, the mental load they spend on growth. And then when they go out to raise capital, they pursue an entirely different strategy over here. They hire an entirely different set of people. They make a different story. They do a different roadshow. And isn't that a lot of load for a growing company to bear or for a CEO to bear? Shouldn't you bring these two things together? Shouldn't your marketing budget to put your brand in the world be the same as your capital raising budget? Because if you can make people love what you do and love your product, why wouldn't they want to be owners as well?
I think what's interesting is, we run a lot of ads for our online store. The majority of our revenue has been direct to consumer online. And just by simply putting an invest button or link on your main website for the product sales, we'll get you a lot of investors as well. It was first surprising when we did that, and we got a lot of clicks directly from our website. And it's because somebody that sees our ad for our technology is interested in the technology. They're interested to learn more about the technology. They may not be interested in buying it right away, but they go to the website, they learn about the product, and then they see the invest button, and that could bring intrigue, and that could bring more investors. So just like you said, you're spending money on acquiring a customer, and instead you acquire an investor. And that's typically what we've seen as well. So just like you said, the ad budgets for both a customer and investor, they do mesh well.
And do you find people will follow the company without necessarily buying? Just kind of come into the orbit and, watch your videos and consume what you put out into the world in terms of content, listen to your podcasts without actually buying something either on the shares or on the product side?
I think in e-commerce, we call it time to conversion. So I think if you approach capital raising via community round the same way you approach a funnel with e-commerce, then yes, there are going to be subscribers, there are going to be followers that follow your story. They want to see how you build a company. And like you said at the very beginning, it's all about trust. So they want to learn more about you. They want to trust you before they invest in you, right? On the product side, they may want to do more research on the product to make sure it works before they buy. So we get that a lot on both the product side as well as the investment side. People want to learn more about the product, the brand, the founders behind it, all of that. And we do educate them. So especially on the e-commerce side, we have a very robust email campaign. And we've replicated that the same way for our investors or potential investors, but more about the company prospects, what's in the pipeline in the future, things like that versus the product itself.
Yeah, I think that's crucial in this day and age. You have to engage, you talk about running a funnel. You have to engage with people and you have to keep them excited about the story. And it's very hard to get people's attention online. Once you have it, it's a shame not to be able to keep it in some way. And so for me, that notion of, building your brand and creating a group of followers and engaging with them, and they are then there for you when it comes time to either, acting on behalf of the company as an ambassador or, somebody who refers someone to buy a product, or an investor when you're raising capital. To me, that's just a much smarter way to go out and raise. But I want to ask you about some of the different decisions you've made along the pathway from a capital markets perspective. You've been raising capital for a long time. Would you share some of the aspects of the journey?
Yeah. So at the very beginning, we're a hardware company. It takes a lot more money than a software company. You're investing in R&D, tooling, molding, inventory. So you got to raise a lot more money than a typical software company. At the beginning, we raised through family and friends, very, very typical. We launched an Indiegogo campaign, so crowdfunding again. And that really gave us a proof of concept and proof of demand. So through Indiegogo, we were able to prove sales demand and interest from the general public, from consumers. We got a lot of angel investor interest from that campaign alone, and that led to our initial angel investors at the very beginning.
Oh, and that wasn't even marketing and offering? That was simply
inbound leads from accredited investors or angel investors that put in a couple hundred thousand. That got us to a level where we could get through production. And we just continually raise through angel investors, family and friends, and that was really the bulk of it. Did a lot of angel group pitches and whatnot at the very beginning. Fast forward a couple of years, went throughout North America, raising through angels. I thought it was time to raise through a venture capital group. Ended up pitching to a few VC groups. Did get a term sheet from one. And this was back in 2019, if I recall correctly. Now, this kind of moves well within our Reg A kind of raise. But when we raised or when we got the term sheet for our raise, it was about $4 million US. And we had, some nice co-investors that came from Canada as well. They pulled a term sheet from us once the Canadian government announced that there's going to be lockdowns in Canada because of COVID-19. So when they pulled the term sheet, obviously a lot of companies are panicking. We're panicking. I think if I was them, I'd do the same thing because they had a very legitimate reason why they pulled the term sheet. And that was because our thesis back then was that we were going to raise this money and expand to commercial buildings and really automate the window shades for energy savings. When the lockdowns came into effect, no one could go in the office. Office space was shut down. It didn't make sense. How are you going to sell to an office space if no one's going to be in the office? So they had a valid reason. I understood their position. They had to, satisfy their investors and shareholders. But it put me to a corner. It kind of made me think, well, if they're not going to invest and we're running out of cash, what can we do next, right? And that kind of led me down the rabbit hole of learning about the other capital raise products in the market. There's interesting ones for inventory financing, which I could get to later, but great products out there like two great products I think entrepreneurs should look at if they're trying to look for inventory financing is Kick Pay and Kick Further. So we did that for the inventory financing side. But we also needed equity investments to grow the company and fund our operations and whatnot. And that led me to Reg A.
Right.
And when I learned about Reg A, it was still very new. The Jobs Act was passed a few years earlier. I was still learning about it. I didn't really know a lot about Reg A, even Reg D for that matter in the US, because obviously we're a Canadian corporation. But I did a lot of research. And trust me when I say it was a stressful time because this was during the holidays. So I was spending all of December just learning about Reg A, getting everything in order, talking to, CrowdCheck, talking to the lawyers. Back then, you had to set up your own credit card payment processor. Back then, all the pieces were scattered all over the place. And I was just mapping everything out. Like, who did I need? I needed a broker-dealer. I needed a transfer agent. I needed a credit card. I needed landing page. I needed marketing. I needed all of these aspects. And I was spending most of December and through the holidays and New Year's just planning that out because, the term sheet was just pulled. Really stressing out about capital raising. But when I discovered Reg A and kind of, it just clicked to me. I'm like, this is just like e-commerce. It just clicked to me. I'm like, it makes sense for us to do something like this. That's what led me down to Reg A. And ever since that, I never looked back. I think the interesting thing about Reg A is that just because you're doing an online crowdfunding or online community round targeting retail investors, it doesn't mean that it doesn't preclude you from angel investors.
Of course.
The bulk of our investments came from accredited investors, came from much larger check sizes. So you do attract, the retail investors that invest the minimum ticket size or whatnot, but you also attract the larger investors that put in a couple $100,000 at a time. So it is a very, very interesting model where you could even target them through general solicitation, through general marketing online, which is something you can't do with Reg D.
Right. So should we talk a little bit about, the regulatory changes in the capital markets that made raising capital from the general public possible today? Trung, when you talk about Reg A, there's a series of regulatory changes that, starting in 2012 when the Jobs Act was passed and 2015 when some amendments kicked in, really accelerated the trend. And in a nutshell, what those regulatory changes did was allowed companies to generally solicit, or in other words, market, offer to sell securities to the public at large. In the old days, you had to be an accredited investor to buy into private companies, or the company had to be public and have to have, filed all of its regulatory disclosures, have its securities registered. With the Jobs Act in 2012 and the amendments in 2015, it became a lot easier for a private company to sell shares or raise capital by advertising online. And you no longer had to be an accredited investor in order to participate in the offering. Anybody can buy. So when you talk about Reg A, you're really talking about one regulatory framework through which a Canadian company can raise capital from the general public in the U.S. Without limiting the opportunity to accredited investors. Some people refer to it as the democratization of the capital markets, because I'm sure you found your customers might have been, individuals, households, not necessarily high net worth professional investors, but people who became enamored of the company and, understood you and followed you. And, at this point, you probably have a couple thousand of them. And so, when you refer to the Shopify of the capital markets, we at DealMaker have brought together a broker-dealer, a transfer agent, a full-stack payment processor. We own a marketing agency. And so we can provide all of the elements for founders like Trung who are looking for a one-stop, shop, a platform where you can open an online store and you can turn your product marketing machine into a capital raising machine. How did you come across DealMaker?
Well, we're both based in Toronto. So back then I was speaking to a few broker-dealers and marketing groups and transfer agents. And a lot of them referred me to DealMaker. And I believe we connected, years ago.
Yeah.
We're both, for all those that don't know, we're both based in Toronto. And I think back then there's more opportunities if you were a U.S.-based company. I'll be completely honest. I think as a U.S. corporation or U.S. entity, you have more opportunities to capital raising. But Reg A does open up the opportunity to raise from U.S. investors as a Canadian corporation. So that was one of the biggest things. I think for us, we were looking for initially similar to like a CRM for capital raising, because you have that obviously for B2B sales and whatnot, but there was no platform out there in the market that allowed us to track the funnel of an investor unless you built your own funnel. And initially, we're looking for a CRM. And when I spoke to you about what we were looking for, you had everything in place. You had the CRM, you had the broker dealer, you had the transfer agent, and it just made things a lot more streamlined. So you just work with one entity, one group that could provide us with all these pieces, rather than me just talking to 3 different groups and getting everything in order. Everything was already connected, similar to like Shopify and the Shopify app store and whatnot. You just pick and choose, right? So that's what led me down to DealMaker. I've been using them for the last 2 years. It's been great. I think there's a lot of cool innovations coming down the pipeline with capital raising with DealMaker and the platform. So definitely appreciate that. And I think it's made my life a lot easier just raising through DealMaker and using the platform. I think when it comes to the innovations around capital raising and retail investors and Reg A, you need a platform like a Shopify for capital raising. I've looked at other platforms, like third-party platforms, to raise on their platforms. The challenge with that is that it's kind of like Amazon. You lose the touch point with the consumer. And I'll be completely honest. If you look at our return rates on our own Shopify store versus Amazon is about 2 to 3 times more. And that's because you lose the ability.
Consumers returning the product they bought.
Yes, because you lose the ability to talk to the consumer, understand the challenges they might have, and provide a solution. You lose the ability to educate them, to email them, to market to them. With a DealMaker platform, you're able to put them in the funnel, educate them on the company, and then convert them in the future. If you use a third-party platform, like many of the platforms in the market today, I think they have their own benefits. Obviously, they have their own investor lists and database and users and whatnot. But if you market and drive your potential investor to that platform, you lose the ability to market to them if they forget who you are. You don't get their contact. They don't belong to you. That's third-party platforms database, things like that. So there's a trade-off. And that's one of the things I really like about managing my own raise. I have conversations directly with each investors. I could pick up the phone, they could call us, we could email each other, we keep them in the loop with emails, and then it builds, like you said at the beginning, trust. And with that trust leads to investors and more investments at the end of the day.
Yeah, so Trung, what you're talking about is a distinction between DealMaker, which is a technology like Shopify, where you white label effectively, you're opening your own offering under your brand. and your investors are buying directly from you, versus the portal model where people can scroll the portal like they were in a shopping mall and
Amazon.
pick something to buy. Yeah, or Amazon, right? So Shopify versus Amazon. DealMaker's on the Shopify, strategy of letting you own your own funnel and
Correct.
engage with your customers on your own white labeled store. I wanted to ask you, do founders still call you or email you and ask for advice about raising capital?
A lot of them do. I think right now, especially in today's day and age, VC funding dropped by 50% year over year, according to Carta. It's drying up, especially for companies like ours, companies that have revenue, are looking for more capital to grow, but interest rates are high. VCs are stepping back. A lot of them are just investing in, AI companies or their existing portfolio. Capital raising has been hard. And again, just like any other new technology or new regulations come into place, there's a level of education that's required. People don't understand that Reg CF and Reg A is available for founders, and they might think it's a big challenge or a big shift or a big deterrent for that matter. But if you actually take a step back, look at the data, understand the process, the amount of money and time you spend trying to raise from a VC, you probably spend less doing with a Reg A and a Reg CF if you have the right team in place. And again, some of the kind of questions I get are around legal fees. Yes, a Reg A is expensive. I always recommend if you're a U.S. corporation, do a Reg CF first. It's much more affordable. You do the same thing, obviously, with DealMaker. I know you guys launched your Reg CF product. It makes sense to do a Reg CF first. But if you have to do a Reg A, you could, you may spend $40, $50 on legal fees. But if you actually look at a VC round, you're spending the same thing on the back end. You have to pay your legal, up to $100K, $200K if it's a Series A on the back end at the end of the close. So in terms of a cost perspective, it's the same thing, if not more through a VC. The terms are a lot more favorable with a Reg A or Reg CF. You set the terms.
Right.
Now, obviously,
it's an important point, right?
Yes.
When you create your own offering online, you're setting the terms, whether it's common shares or a SAFE or pref, the valuation. It's like when you sell a product, right? You have to stand behind the offering and say, I've done my research. I know people can buy something comparable for X dollars. So I'm setting a price that I feel, is fair, versus when you're, raising capital and you're in the hands of, a different process who might say to you, this is what I'm willing to pay. This is what your valuation is.
Yeah.
So the self-hosted, self-driven aspect of capital raising appeals to you.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I haven't thought of it like that, but it brings up a good point when you say you set your price. If we set our consumer product price too high, consumers aren't going to buy it.
That's right.
So it's the same thing with issuing shares. If you set your valuation too high or unrealistic or the terms are bad, they're not going to buy.
Yeah, I think you have to treat the public with respect. Exactly. It's an educated public. It's a internet savvy public, and they know what they're buying, and they do due diligence. What we find is, the average purchase amount on our platform for companies like RYSE, it's actually a price point that's lower than what people spend online sometimes when they buy like a Peloton or something, right? So people's buying patterns online have really changed. And people have gotten very accustomed to buying big ticket items online, and so when you're raising capital online, you have to treat the public with respect, and you have to earn their trust, and you have to set a price that will stand up to comparison because they will price shop.
Exactly. So I think that's a good point. I think obviously there's a lot of bad actors in the space, like any kind of space you have. So investors have to be very wary. But at the end of the day, if you have a good offering, a good company, they'll do their research. They'll determine if it's a good term or not. We get a lot of sophisticated investors, even if they're retail investors. And I think this is one of the things that's being challenged with the SEC and the definition of accredited investors out there. You don't have to be just rich to understand investments. A lot of them have CFA designations or are accountants, but they may not be accredited. So I know that behind the scenes with SEC, they're trying to change that definition of what an accredited investor is, and open up that door to a lot of these more sophisticated investors. So just because you're targeting retail investors doesn't preclude you from accredited investors. So you have to be very honest about your offering, make sure it's fair, at the end of the day, you want to have a win-win opportunity. You're building a company here at the end of the day. You want the company to have a successful exit at the end of the day. So you gotta make sure that the offering is fair for the investors, that they get a return on investment. When you do make an exit, and that's one thing that they do look for. So when we do price our offering, or when we do set the terms, it is very fair. There's a story behind it. It makes sense. And even when you look at the market for VC funding or anything like that, I always say this: valuation is an art, not a science. Valuation is what someone's willing to pay for it. If you take a step back a year ago, 2 years ago, crypto companies and NFTs, meta companies, their valuations were through the roof. Right. Look at it now; it's like 90% drop in value. Why is that? Nobody wants it.
Those days seem like a long time ago.
Yeah. I'm sure you have some NFTs in your portfolio, Matt.
One thing I admire about you, Trung, is your persistence. And when you talk about all of the steps you went through to educate yourself about, what are the options when I'm raising capital? How can I maximize my outcomes? How can I optimize my processes? I wonder how that quality of grit and persistence, did that get coached for you, or how would founders embody that, or what would you say to founders about the value and quality of persistence?
Great question. I think grit is one of the biggest things investors look for, and it's one of the biggest things I look for from fellow founders. I think part of being grit, and this is a very broad characterization, but you have to be very persistent and very decisive. And what I mean by that is that a lot of founders, when they get pushed to the wall or pushed to the edge, they don't know how to react. Versus a problem-solving, thinking type of founder where they say, okay, this is the problem I have right now. What's the solution? And they don't give up. They do their research. They figure out a solution for that problem, because there's always going to be a solution. And I think having grit, when you're faced with those challenges, having grit allows you to find that solution to that problem. So I think when I meet founders and they're asking me questions, there's a difference between founders looking for a solution versus a founder crying and complaining, if that makes sense. And I appreciate the ones that are always looking for a solution, always rolling with the punches, if you will. There's a very, very famous quote that I really, really like, and I always repeat it. It's from Rocky. I don't know if you remember it, but it's in the movie Rocky Balboa, where he's talking to his son and he's saying, nothing hits harder than life. It's not about how hard you get hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and get back up and keep moving forward. That's kind of like the definition of grit, in my opinion. You're going to get hit, but it's how you react to that, how you get back up, and how you survive. And I think that's one thing I look for founders, and that's one thing investors definitely look for founders. And there's a lot of first-time founders, or founders trying to raise money at the early stages, where an investor will just say no, see how you do over the next few months, see how you respond to adversity. That's a big one, responding to adversity before they invest. And I do the same thing. Before I invest in someone, I'm going to see how they respond to adversity. If they give up right away, why am I going to invest in them, right? Yeah. So the idea of grit, responding to adversity, picking yourself back up when you get punched, all plays hand in hand. That's kind of the ideal character that a founder needs to have in order to survive. Because, if I didn't have that kind of mentality of like, hey, what the hell we're going to do now that the VC pulled the term sheet, we'd be dead in the water. But because of that, I just discovered Reg A, and here we are today.
Yeah, no, I think that's very valuable wisdom to pass on, right? Even founders who have a vision, and it starts with a vision. The vision says, this is where I think we can get to, right? You don't know, no one has a crystal ball of in between now and then what obstacles I'm going to face along the way. And so the mindset around being able to take a punch or react to adversity, the flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances. I want to go here, but look, there's an obstacle. I'll build a bridge. I'll go around it, right? I'll build alliances. That mindset, I think, is absolutely crucial. Well, I think we'll end there for today, but this was certainly a delight, and I hope helpful for other founders. Any kind of last words, Trung, that you want to pass on, or any kind of message that you have for founders who are looking to follow in your footsteps?
I think with capital raising, and to kind of follow with the last point you made, grit, adversity, all of that matters. Be aggressive. I think founders today, they give up too easily. I think if you want to be successful in capital raising and building your company, you have to really be a big problem solver. Don't give up. Figure out there's always going to be a solution. You just have to figure it out. There's always a creative solution. And I think that's one of the biggest things I want to pass on to founders. Keep on hustling through it. Keep on thinking through it. Be scrappy. You'll figure it out. Everything's figure outable.
Wonderful words of wisdom from Trung Pham. Hello, RYSE. Thank you so much.
Thank you.